When news of COVID-19 began to spread, I remarked to several people that as a new virus on the human landscape, we were going to have to take a long view of this illness, that it would not go away quickly, that we would have to adapt to it like we have had to adapt to other illnesses over the extended arc of history. I mentioned that the best we could hope for would be to develop vaccine and effective therapeutic drugs, but even then, not all vaccines and drugs have the same effect. We might locate successful vaccines along a continuum. On one side stands Jonas Salk's treatment for polio. By 1979, his inactive polio vaccine had essentially eliminated the threat of what had been a disease of epidemic injury in the United States as recently as 1952. As most of us have experienced firsthand, a few shots in infancy followed by occasional boosters are all that we require today to develop and to maintain immunity from polio. On the other end of the spectrum stand seasonal flu vaccines. These require renewed shots annually because influenza viruses mutate so readily. The yearly shot is simply calibrated to treat the most prevalent forms of the flu that year. And in fact, the shots usually contain 3 or 4 different strains of virus just to cover the widest possible range of potential infectants. And we occasionally have to treat associated bacterial infections with antibiotics. It's not yet clear where a vaccine for SARS-CoV-2 will fit on this continuum. Science magazine reported in July that the COVID virus has been mutating, but not as dramatically and dangerously as we might expect. At least thus far, it has not altered itself the way that influenza or HN viruses do. Maybe scientists will be able to develop a vaccine that requires a renewal shot, but perhaps just every 2 or 3 years. Even if our wildest aspirations materialize and we find ourselves nearer to the extraordinary results of Salk's polio vaccine, we recall that it took 2 decades for its widespread application to eliminate the threat of polio in the West, and outside the West, polio remains a threat in many areas. It may be years before we reach a time after COVID. At some point, difficult as it might be, we will have to get our minds around the reality that the coronavirus disease, which emerged in 2019, may be with us in 2021, 2022, and beyond. For many of us, indeed, there may not be a time after COVID. We will likely get a handle on this disease, but the handle that we get may be somewhere between the handle we got on polio and the handle that we have on the seasonal flu. The mortality rate may decrease, but not to 0. We may have to receive semi-regular booster shots. We may have to wear a mask, at least during peak seasons of infection. I do recognize how much these observations stand against prevailing hopes. But I continue to share them because I sense that the health of our social soul will only be improved as we come to grips with the change that is represented by this novel virus. Even more than the threat of the virus itself, it seems, we are brought low by the extensive change that its presence demands of us. Change can be difficult because it is almost always disruptive. It unsettles routines and challenges established patterns of success. But we do well to focus on the positives that come from change. It is often only by change that a society becomes more just and inclusive. The present racial strife in our country teaches us that for many people, change is preferable to returning to a normality that excludes them. Change also brings innovation. It is right to grieve for businesses that are lost during this time of pandemic, because with them collapse the dreams, spent energies, and the livelihood of real people. They deserve our compassion, yet they also deserve our encouragement. It is right to pray for and tangibly support ways to keep their entrepreneurial spirit from collapsing, to cheer their efforts to reinvent and to help provide for their needs as they try to do so. Most importantly, we in the church do well to reclaim our faith in our self-translating God. The God of the Bible is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, not because he is like an unmoving stone, but because he remains faithful, constant in his faithfulness to his people. God elects a life with us, to take on our existence to the point of our diseases and their consequences, so that the power of the Creator might be with us, even facing death. Because our severest challenges are not too much for our loving God. We have good cause to persevere and to hope for new life to come out of every collapse.